Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Cimmerian September in its waning days. Just a couple more days left in Cimmerian September, Michael K. Vaughan's BookTube event for 2024, where we read Conan. We read Conan, the great creation of Robert E. Howard. The focus for Cimmerian September in 2024 is pastiche, and even that focus has a focus. Of course, these are just the lightest of suggestions. You know Michael K. Vaughan's channel as well as you know my channel. He only wants you to have fun. But even the suggestion of a Conan pastiche has a further suggestion, which is maybe to concentrate on the pastiche works that introduced a whole generation of readers to Conan. A whole generation of readers who missed weird tales, caught it once in a while. Maybe an older brother had a ragged issue, but they didn't read anything that was premiering in weird tales. And like all right-thinking people, they lived in the United States of America, not anywhere else in the world. So for a huge number of the people in that generation, they were introduced to Conan by the pastiches of Elsbreg de Camp and Lynn Carter, assist here and there from Bjorn Nyberg. And these are pastiches with a problem. If they were just a row of 12 or 13 novels that were pastiche novels, the first pastiche novels that introduced everybody and said, oh, hey, have you heard about these stories that this guy from Cross Plains, Texas wrote in Weird Tales? We love them. Here are our versions of those. Here are more adventures of ours of these characters. That would be one thing. But they didn't do that. Those original Ace, Elsbreg de Camp and Lynn Carter books did not do that. Instead, they went at the stories that Robert E. Howard had written as if they were raw material. And I'm not sure, now, almost a century later, I'm not sure how much of a crime that was. I think we commit a bit of an act of hindsight to look all the way back to when the ink was still fresh on pulp stuff and expect people to take that with a kind of literary curatorial philosophy. I think we make a little bit of mistake of hindsight to think that way. I don't think it was quite the desecration that we see it as now. Of course it is. It is a desecration to take one author's work, regardless of where they published it, and think, well, this is raw material. This is a bolt of cloth, and I can rework this as I please. I can not only tell pastiche stories about this, which is fine, but I can go into the raw material and rework it. I can add stuff to the raw material. I can take a short story that I find in the author's a locked box in his house and say, I don't know this quite works. Which is what Elsbreg de Camp and Lynn Carter did. They went at the Conan stories in a completely different way than Robert E. Howard had imagined. They imagined a chronological tapestry, a broad chronological tapestry. So where does Conan start? And where does he go from there? Where does he go from there? And as a result, they started to fill in the gaps in the chronology that Robert E. Howard had left blank, almost as if Robert E. Howard created an incomplete or inadequate thing, and they were going to flesh it out. And they put his name on it, almost indistinguishably. If you read in the fine lines, if you read their essays, if you read their editorials, you'll see that they were always perfectly clear about the distinction. Yes, this thing that I'm including in this book that has Robert E. Howard's name on the cover is not Robert E. Howard at all. He never saw it. He never knew anything about it. And then there's this thing that's 30% him, but he would have recognized and maybe objected right away to how much is being changed. And then there are these stories in this table of contents that are completely him. Or are they? Well, maybe they're the version that he wrote. Maybe they're the version that he got back with heavy edits from someone who was neither Elsbreg de Camp nor Lynn Carter nor Bjorn Nyberg. Maybe they're that corrected version, only then corrected by somebody else. A textual mess, in other words. And I have a soft spot for those original paperbacks. Most of them have unbelievable artwork, cover artwork by Frank Frazetta. I have a soft spot for those because those were my introduction to Conan, largely. Maybe a bit a bit here or there before that, but those were my introduction. I had those original mass market paperbacks, read them till they fell apart, got new replacements, handed them out to people, recommended them to people, said these are not just beautiful items to hold, but they're also so good. This is just a world that we don't know. But my experience rereading them for Cimmerian September 24 has been pretty bad. It's been pretty rocky. And I've kind of made a mental note not to do that again. There are plenty of other Conan pastiche novels that were written free and clear of any idea of meddling with the originals. I thought, a lot of those you haven't read, a lot of those you have read, and it's been a long time. Go to those and stick with those. But Cimmerian September is coming to an end. There are only a couple of days left in September. You can tell because the daytime high temperature in Massachusetts, the daytime high temperature here in Boston, has gone from 97 degrees to about 92 degrees. That's bone chilling. So I thought last night I made the decision. It was a bad decision in retrospect. I now see, to go back to one of those old Ace paperbacks and give it a reread. I went to the bother of finding these things. When my old copies had long since gone, I went to the bother of finding them at the Book Barn in Niantic, Connecticut. So I thought, all right, go back and try another one. And on one level, I'm sorry that I did, because it was really, really, really bad. It was this, Conan the Buccaneer. This is a great Frank Frazetta cover here in this particular reissue. There's no fuss on the back except a barcode that could easily have been on the inside back cover. You just get Frazetta's artwork. Just amazing. On one level, it was a bad idea for me to go back to these old Conans, because this was really, really bad. Worse, I think, than any other of these L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter books that I've reread recently. And I think, if I had to guess, I don't know the textual history of these things, but if I had to guess, I would say that I can guess a reason why this is worse. And that is that despite the cover, this was written only by Lynn Carter. If I had to guess, that would be what I would say. Lynn Carter and L. Sprague de Camp, neither one of them are setting the world on fire, rhetorically speaking, but L. Sprague de Camp is a better writer than Lynn Carter. And that was the halfway point of this book. When I was reading this thing, I was thinking, all right, well, that maybe explains it. Is that maybe Lynn Carter touched up a bit here or there, phoned in a bit here or there, but that this is mostly Lynn Carter. And L. Sprague de Camp barely had anything to do with this. I don't know if that's right or wrong. It doesn't much matter, because I'm not going to be returning to this book. I'm not going to do any nostalgia reading of this thing again. That's the bad part, is that this was a horrible book. There is a good part, though, which is that I think this gave me an insight into a lot to do with pastiche just in general, and with these pastiches in specific. Conan is in his mid-30s in this story. He gets permission. He gets an actual commission to be a buccaneer, to be a pirate. There was a joke that was made a long time ago, and it bears out. It's told in Forster's Horatio Hornblower novels. It's told again in Patrick O'Brien's Aubrey and Maturin novels. There's an old joke about how if you're a pirate, that means you're stealing from the government on the high seas. And if you're a pirate for the government, you get a letter of marque. you get a note of permission that you can be a pirate. And that's the only difference is between the two. Otherwise, it's the same thing. If we wanted to, we could dig him up and ask John Hancock, of famous Boston founding father fame, all about the difference between being a pirate and being a privateer, having a letter of marque. But that's what Conan is doing in this book. He's on one adventure after another. He isn't really Conan. Almost at any point in this book, he's not really Conan. In the sense that he's nothing like the Robert E. Howard character. He's awful talky. He's awful talky. And it's all just, it's so of a piece with the other L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter Conan books. It's so the same as that. So Prince Valiant, so Cod Errol Flynn, just not at all like the Conan who is actually in the unchanged Robert E. Howard stories. He talks a lot. He's beaten a lot. He outsmarts people. He uses his wits, but he's also a giant of brawn, and he has one adventure after another, and the adventures spiral to a pinnacle in which he and his men are pitted against a horde of armed warriors who outnumber them, and also, wait for it, Thoth Amon, the mystical sorcerer supreme who has been in and out of these Elsbreg de Camp books and other Conan pastiche novels, like a doorman. He shows up all the time. The climax of this book has him facing off against Conan's men, and Thoth Amon has been doing wonders throughout this book, just as a gigantically powerful sorcerer would be able to do. It underscores the point that I've made a few times in Conan pastiche novels, which is, if Thoth Amon were as powerful as he's often made to be in these stories, well, he would just wink Conan out of existence. He wouldn't even need to be in the same country to do it. Or, like I've mentioned many times before, if he can use his sorcery to animate a stone statue to fly to where Conan is and crush him to death, and by sheer strength of will and grit of determination, or maybe a sorcerer's bauble here or there, Conan manages just barely to fight the thing off, well, then Thoth Amon could animate 30 of those, or 300 of those. So it's going to exhaust him. Okay, but at the end of his afternoon, Conan the Barbarian is going to be dead. So it doesn't make any sense, and Thoth Amon is like that all throughout this book. But then suddenly at the end of the book, when he's urging his non-sorcerous human catspaws to fight extra hard, get your men together and fight extra hard, they say to him, one of them actually asks him, why don't you use your spells? And he says, well, even sorcery has limits. Okay, fine. And he and Conan are actually across a room from each other. And he is telling his men, that barbarian scum and his men wipe them out. And we're told at the end of the book, after all the trouble that Conan's been through, we're told that he makes a rude comment to Thoth Amon. But we don't get told what it is. We've got heads being blown apart, guts being eviscerated, all sorts of R-rated sexual stuff in this book. But when we get to the climax, we don't hear what Conan has to say. And it's not Conan by that point anyway. It hasn't been all along. Except for a moment here or there, it hasn't been all along. It's been some other kind of guy. It's been the founding years of what came to be called, of what Lynn Carter did more than anybody to call sword and sorcery, features a kind of male lead who has a grandiloquent, funny, fussy way of talking, even in emergencies. It can be done really, really well. I have read it done really, really well, but it's not Conan. That kind of fussy, I will engage in fisticuffs, but I really think you're misunderstanding the metaphysics of the moment. That kind of character, who for lamentably like 10 or 20 or 30 years was the arch character for sword and sorcery after the first wave of it. I never thought it was clever. I always thought it was really dumb. This is just the way that bookish geeks would make a character talk. That kind of character had sway, and right around the time when this book, 1971, this book came out, right around the time when this came out, and I think that membrane is permeable. I think that's why Conan talks like one of those characters. He might have been a fundamental figure in what someone later on called sword and sorcery fiction, but he wasn't that kind of a character. And he is in this book, and it's unbearable to see his name attached to it, to have his name hung on whoever this guy is. And you might think, okay, well, if it was that bad, what could possibly be the upswing? You said there was an upswing, a positive side of reading this thing. There was. And it comes from the introduction. Lynn Carter writes the introduction to this book. There are two items at the beginning of this that reinforce a theory of mine. I think I now understand what bothers me most about these pastiches, what always has bothered me most about them. But I want to read to you one bit of Lynn Carter's introduction where he is talking about Robert E. Howard's Hyborian age, the age in which that Conan bestrode like a colossus. He writes, "It is a world that never was, but certainly should have been. A gorgeous, improbable, romantic world where all the men are handsome and heroic, all the girls impossibly beautiful, and willing to dally back of the arena with a gladiator or two. A world made up of trackless jungles, mighty mountains, and shining seas, where cities blaze with barbaric splendor, glorious quests are possible, and adventure is a part of everyday life." If you've read Robert E. Howard's original Conan stories, does that sound like his Hyborian age? A time where all men are handsome and heroic? Does that sound like his Hyborian age? No, it doesn't at all. It made me realize, reading that introduction, I think I skipped it the first time I read this book. I'm glad I read it this time, although it's awful. It just gets worse from there. But I'm glad I read it because it reminded me of something and it showed me something. It reminded me of something, a claim that people who've never read Robert E. Howard, any Robert E. Howard, maybe don't know anything about him, people that just think, oh, he's a pulp writer, wrote Conan stories, are not going to believe. And that is that he, in addition to being personally an extremely complicated man, he was also an extremely serious writer. People, literary snobs who don't care about pulp fiction, don't care about fantasy stories at all, are just going to laugh at that. In the little tittering one edge of the lips up a fraction inch higher than the other way that they have of laughing at anything. They're going to laugh at that. Oh, how serious could he be? Bug-eyed monsters? The darkness from between the stars? How serious could he be? Nevertheless, he was a very serious writer. He could be funny, but he was a very serious writer. And a serious, complicated man. And the description that I just gave you of the Hyborian age is fundamentally not serious. What Lynn Carter's describing there is a burlesque. It's the taking of the complicated, extremely not wondrous and glittering Hyborian age that Robert E. Howard thought up and flattening it into this party-colored burlesque where everything's over the top and all the men are mighty thewed and all the women are of easy virtue and there are monsters and magicians and it's all very tinny and one note. There's no complexity to it at all. Again, literary snobs are going to say, well, there wasn't any complexity to start with. That's not true. And as I always say on this channel, their literary snobbery is not my problem. But it is amazing to me to read this introduction and realize that the foremost popularizers of Robert E. Howard's imaginary world, the foremost popularizers of his Conan the Barbarian, do not understand that world. That's what this introduction made me realize. I didn't read the introduction this time either until I'd finished the book. Then I read the introduction. This was my second time through the book, my first time reading the introduction, and the introduction made sense of the book. This is a Conan book written by someone who does not understand Robert E. Howard's writing on a really fundamental level. And, you know, if I needed any corroboration that that was true, I could go to the dedication of this volume from 1971 to the greatest living creator of swords play and sorcery. Take a guess who that's going to be. Take a guess who that would be if Lynn Carter did understand what Robert E. Howard wrote. And then take a guess who it would be if he didn't understand. If he just had no idea what he was talking about and was basically talking about his own writing. Do you know who that's dedicated to? The greatest creator of swords play and sorcery? J.R.R. Tolkien. I read that dedication and just laughed. All was made clear. Speak, friend, and enter. All of a sudden, I understood. I now know what the main problem with these old ace paperback Conan Elsprague de Camp books are. They don't understand Conan. I know the Elsprague de Camp especially will go on and on in his introductions to these volumes about how had his hands on original manuscripts, was right there at the beginning, was present at the creation, all that sort of stuff. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. He doesn't understand what he's dealing with here. Seems kind of odd, but much later writers understand this stuff much better. Some of them do. So I'm going to let Conan the Buccaneer be my goodbye for Cimmerian September 2024. Who knows? I might get back my tolerance and read these again next year. But I'm going to let this be my goodbye to these old Ace paperbacks for 2024. I'm not going to read any more of these. I will still read Conan Pastiche to see out Cimmerian September, but it won't be any more of these Elsbreg de Camp and Lynn Carter things. They're not about Conan. They're about Volcar the Mighty Thewed. They might as well have come from John Jakes' novel, Mention My Name in Atlantis. They might as well have come from that. I would call that relatively harmless, except for the one evil that they do, which is to sprinkle in just enough original Robert E. Howard to blur the lines, which of course has been the problem that people have had with these things from the beginning. So I'm going to leave that problem behind. I'm going to read Conan Pastiche novels to finish out Cimmerian September, but it's not going to be these. So I will see what I throw on the pile tonight. I will be back tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.